Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on June the 24th to bring you guys another week of storylines around the NFL, kicking it off with the 18-game regular season, talking more about it, this time getting some players' input about it. Some don't really mind it, some feel very strongly against it, so we're going to get into that. Then also some gradings on the offseason so far in the NFL, starting off with the NFC North. We're going to go through all four teams and grade their offseasons up until this point because we are getting more into the thick of things, so we're going to go through that. And also the Carolina Panthers. Adam Thielen already noticing a difference in Bryce Young now heading into training camp in his second year. What big changes can we expect? And maybe what was the reason for such a struggling first year for Bryce Young? That and much more on today's show. As a reminder, if you guys have any questions or comments you want to make, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. By using this link, I'm able to see your question or comment, and that way I can acknowledge it, get your guys' perspective on anything I say or any of the topics today, and that way we can keep the conversation going. It's a massive help for the program and the entire network, so if you would, please use that tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. But without further ado, we will start off on that topic that I just mentioned, the NFL players. More players talking about this 18-game regular season. Recently, ESPN surveyed players from multiple teams for their opinions on adding an extra game to the regular season and having probably the Super Bowl pushed back to President's Day weekend with that extra bye week also included there. Before, we talked about Ryan Kelly and him giving his opinion, a very strong opinion against adding another game to the regular season. But now we got some more players giving their input on it. Some felt indifferent about it, and some, like Ryan Kelly, felt very strongly on it. Some players that felt, in favor of it, you could say, or indifferent about it, were Pittsburgh Steelers' Demonte Casey. He made some pretty good points. He said that he wouldn't complain already as a veteran player in the NFL, acknowledging the fact that a honest reality with what he pointed out, that as a veteran, he has seen mostly that the NFL ends up getting their way in the end, and it does usually fall to the fact that the NFL, if they really want something bad, they'll go to all lengths to end up achieving what they want in the end. So as a veteran, he sort of has acknowledged that, and keeping it real with anybody that asked the question as the interviewer, that's where he stood on it. You just have to adjust as a veteran. He also said it's another week, to potentially get paid, receive another game check, and feed your family in that instance, which you can't really blame him for. You can't blame anybody for having that sort of mindset. Then you look at Carolina Panthers tight end Tommy Tremble, and he was another player that was okay with it. He said as long as the pay aligns with adding another week of work, hopefully it's all for the best interest of the NFL and the players in his opinion. But again, he's another one that didn't feel too strongly about it, almost accepting the fact already that it could be a reality in the near future. And also one of his teammates, linebacker Josie Jewell, another game means more money, no problem with it, just plain and simple, just getting more compensation for another week. He's all right with it. He sees no problem with it. And some results from that ESPN survey came out as 46% in favor of the 18-game regular season, but with stipulations like more pay and something along the lines of that, probably more benefits, more health benefits, or just more security in their contracts with adding another game. 46% were in favor of that with some added stipulations. 8% also were in favor, but without stipulations. So not really feeling too strongly about it. If it happens, it happens. They would go along with it. Then you had 19% of the players that were surveyed that were completely against the 18-game regular season. And that's where we go into one of the strongest members of that 19% in Pittsburgh Steelers, Deshaun Elliott. New to the Steelers, played last year with the Miami Dolphins as a safety, and now he got a chance to talk about it. I mentioned his teammate Demonte Casey being interviewed about the 18-game regular season, and you had Deshaun Elliott sort of interject and just have comments in the background while Demonte Casey was being interviewed. And then clearly the media transitioned over to him, and he got his thoughts out there in the air, to which he said, "They're not paying us enough money already. They're stingy with their money, so they want to make us play 18 games. As a player union, we should get way more than what we're getting right now, and not just the top guys either." He also added that they actually don't have to go out there and put their bodies on the line and put their bodies at risk, meaning the owners, the NFL, anyone that's thinking about adding an 18-game regular season. He says they don't really get it because they're not the ones actually out there, so it's easy, obviously, to make those decisions when you don't have to wake up the next morning and feeling sore from your feet all the way up to your shoulders, potentially. So that's another good point. It's one that just keeps coming up over and over from the players, because it is a very valid point, and it makes sense, obviously, and it is a serious health concern if you're playing maybe too many weeks, and how does that impact you in the long run. And that's sort of where more of these players were being pushed to making their reasons out to. With Pittsburgh Steelers, also their guard James Daniels brought up the fact that plain and simple, that if it was about player safety, like the NFLPA likes to bring up, like the NFL likes to make a big deal out of when they make all these new rules, they don't want too much contact in the offseason. They take away the hip drop tackle. They want to make it about player safety, but in James Daniels' mind, he said if they were worried about player safety, it would take away games rather than adding on more games. So it really doesn't come down to player safety, it just comes down to money. So that was pretty plain and simple as well. And another fellow offensive lineman, Deion Dawkins from the Buffalo Bills, also brought up a interesting point that I thought I haven't seen yet, and that is very true, and it makes a lot of sense that players now, with adding more of a workload onto it and maybe a shorter offseason and how they restructured, that is all yet to be ironed out. But by adding another week, it sort of gives players not enough time to grow themselves outside of the game of football, because they now add more meaningful games. Now you have the playoffs also on top of that, and by the time that ends, it's February. And then if they don't restructure the offseason, you're already getting back in the swing of things by maybe April, mid-April, late April. So you don't really get enough time to venture out in other career paths. That is important, obviously, because if you add another game, it could shorten the careers of some players, especially those that get hit on every play. And then at that point, if you don't have enough time to grow yourself outside of the game of football in the limited free time that you have, outside of that, what are you going to do once the playing days are over? You know what I mean? It's like you get done with it, and then you're sort of left just looking around, not really knowing what to do, not really having an avenue to go down, because you don't have that much time outside of the game of football, basically to stay relevant in a way. Of course, most players go to broadcasting, go to media, but if you don't really have too much experience in that while you're playing, like you're starting to see more players do, it could be a little bit intimidating jumping over to that, giving your thoughts on everything like that. So that's another point that Deion Dawkins brought up that I thought I haven't heard of. And Minkah Fitzpatrick, another fellow Steeler, gave his thoughts, and he said that 17 games seems to be more than enough. He doesn't understand why they're trying to add another game, and that taking away a preseason game won't really matter, because the guys that would play in there or that would be available to play wouldn't be playing anyway. Like the main guys wouldn't be playing in those preseason games anyway, so it doesn't really do too much for them, at least, to take the game away. Then you even have some owners, I brought it up before in a previous episode, New York Giants owner John Mara is one of the owners not too sure about adding another game because he's worried about the player fatigue and the wear and tear, and that sort of goes along the lines of the quality that's put out there, because now, with more facts, more player input that we have now, it brings up the point, going off of what John Mara said and really worrying about the wear and tear. It goes down the road of the quality of games that you see, and really with the limited preparation, if you take away another preseason game, that leaves you with about 2, and how many of the real starters, the number 1 quarterbacks, the wide receivers, the number 1 running backs, how many are going to really be out there for both games? Probably not that many. So then that means you have 1 preseason game to run through everything, a real life rehearsal, a real life run through of the actual game. If you limit that to 1 during the offseason, then how is that going to look when the real games start in week 1, week 2, when you don't have that much preparation leading up to it? Yeah, of course you have training camp and mini camp and all that sort of stuff still, But when you only have one real rehearsal of what the actual performance is going to look like, it might end up looking like preseason games in week 1 through probably 3, week 1 through 2 of the actual regular season. And is that a good product that the NFL wants to put out there just because they want to take away one more preseason game and want to throw out there another regular season game? Is it going to look like a regular season game at the end of the day? So that's something that they have to take into consideration. Another change like this would probably, because it is so important and monumental, it would require most likely a new CBA agreement, a whole new CBA, which they just recently agreed on this one in 2020. So that one is set to expire in another 7 to 6 years. So with this now being the case, this now being brought up, they're going to have to agree to a whole new CBA. And that's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of back and forth and a lot of compromise, honestly, from both sides. And with that compromise comes the biggest topic of the revenue split. None of these players are going to agree to an 18-game regular season if they don't have a greater chunk of the pie to sort of distribute among all players, not just the top guys like DeShon Elliott said. Some of the guys that aren't in the top 3% of the highest earning contracts, they also want to receive more pay because they're also going to be out there playing, obviously. So how they distribute that throughout the entire NFL, not just the top contracts, will be a massive point. And just the last point on here, with how they restructure the offseason, I've said it before, without the OTAs, mandatory minicamp, and the preseason especially, you're only really hurting the younger players and how much they contribute to their teams right away. So if the NFL doesn't value that too much, they're going to go through with this anyway, unless they find another alternative to still have those, and maybe just making it mandatory for the younger players, making it mandatory for them to still have rookie minicamp, to still have OTAs, mandatory minicamp, making that all a must for rookies, I think could be a solution to this. But it isn't a situation where the veterans have to go to this if they feel that they don't have enough off time already. So maybe that's another alternative to change this, because the offseason and how they structure it will be important, because it will only hurt the younger players, and that's not fair to them if they get their time to prepare taken away because it just doesn't fit the veterans because they're already comfortable. You got to find a happy medium there to make everyone happy, and that's why this isn't so easy, obviously. Players can say one thing, the NFL can say another thing, but it's going to take a long time for this to really be settled on something that makes everybody happy at least, or somewhat close to content, all right, with this situation. No one's actually really happy when a whole new CBA is made, but that's the reality of it. That's where it stands, how the NFL players, some of them, are feeling about it. And I would love to know what you guys think about it. Another game being added. It sounds great for us fans, but from a player perspective, let me know what you guys think on another game being added. And with that being said, we're going to go to a quick break. And when we return, a lot more to talk about, starting off with ranking, or grading, actually, I should say, the off seasons in the NFC North. Grading how well the Packers, Bears, Vikings, and the Detroit Lions all did this offseason now that we're ramping it up a little bit more heading into training camp. You're not going to want to miss that, so stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.